Hello, you wonderful people. If you haven't already, make sure you sign up to our Patreon account. The link will be in the description of this podcast, but you can also go to patreon.com/Earthy Delights Pod. For as little as €4 a month, you can help us out and become part of our little community. You'll get early access to all of the pods, and you'll also get a monthly newsletter from myself and Jim. So basically, two monthly newsletters where we'll talk about stuff that's going on in our own personal lives and what we've been thinking about/inspired about. We also are asking you guys to get involved with the podcast. So you can send in questions for our upcoming guests, or you can suggest to us people or topics you would like us to interview and explore further. We love you. We hope that you love us, and hopefully, just by giving us as little as €4 a month, that's basically, it's not even a pint in London, that you can help us become an even better podcast. Thank you all.
Milo O'Shea had a very significant impact on my development in my teenage years and beyond. He was a unique figure in my secondary school who never shied away from showing his students how he really felt. This wasn't always pretty, but it was human. And this aspect of humanity is crucial to the growth of young people, at least in my opinion. Milo was one of the few teachers in my life that really demonstrated an interest in the student's ability to grow as a person, not just academically. I specifically remember him telling my class one day that it will be our attitude and perspective out there that will dictate our experience of life rather than the results of upcoming exams. And as the years have passed by, these words have never veered too far away from my regular thought rotation. I wanted to record a conversation with him to talk about how he cultivated that perspective in himself, the need for deep internal questioning, how he views teaching, the power of music and poetry to evoke inspiration, and much more. This was a special chat for me, and I'm very grateful he agreed to come on. I'm very confident that anyone who has a fond memory of an early teacher or mentor will take something from this. Thanks for listening. All the best. Milo O'Shea, welcome to the podcast.
James, how are you doing? Great.
Thanks for saying yeah. Thanks for agreeing. Thanks for showing me your house. It's been great to be here.
Absolute pleasure to see after all these years how the years have spiraled away.
I know. 9 years.
9 years, is it?
9 years.
I wouldn't have known that.
No?
I wouldn't have known what year you graduated. I remember you vividly, alright. Troublemaker.
I just, I talk too much, I think. I love talking too much.
No, it's a beautiful thing. That's what it's about.
It's a good issue to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we get going, we like to ask what's the crack? Like how have things been for you?
What's the crack?
Yeah, do you know the way very often in Ireland you ask what's the crack and you answer the question with what's the crack, or you answer the question like, oh, you know yourself, or you answer the question like, sure, listen, you know, all like non-answers.
Yeah.
To the point where I don't think the average Irish person actually knows how to answer the question adequately or like authentically even.
Yeah, I think that's a key word, isn't it? Authentically.
Yeah.
And I suppose I'd equate what I know, my generation definitely.
Yeah.
And I come from a generation where you did not articulate how you felt. And maybe sometimes that was good in terms of there wasn't an oversharing, but there was definitely a repression. Yeah. And it would have been perceived as you don't. And there would have been, I suppose, in an era of machismo and an era of masculinity, that you had to fulfill that certain criteria, and you had to be seen to be to be up there and to be counted and to be, for want of a better word, hard. So you did not express any vulnerability, and I think that's perhaps still there. Perhaps not to the same extent that there's healthier articulation, but definitely I come from a generation where, and I would have been hugely conscious of that you didn't show vulnerability.
No.
You didn't articulate any profundity of how you felt, and as you say, you pinpointed it there, where you'll answer a question with a question. So how am I feeling right now? I feel absolutely stilted and intimidated. The fact that there's a microphone where we were absolutely flowing 10 minutes ago.
Okay.
And I would have been conscious today of, say, a past pupil.
Yeah.
And I wasn't, because there was a flow, there was a frequency, it was lovely.
Yeah.
But I would have been conscious before, if you ask me what's the crack, I would have been conscious meeting a past pupil, and I very often am.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I meet past pupils, and how do I say this? They have an idea, a narrative, or this grandiose meta narrative of who you are or how they remember you, and not always accurately. I've been told over the years that I've done things that maybe. But and in many ways there's kind of, for good or for bad, and maybe good and bad, but it's a mythologization of an entity and a person who you are. And sometimes you wonder, I'm not that person. Or I am essentially and fundamentally that person. But
there's other sides.
But yeah, I suppose, we're a panoply of different things, and I suppose there's a lot goes on inside us.
Yeah.
And there's disparate forces. But like, say when you're in a classroom, it's a lovely thing. But it's your public persona. You're performing, and teaching at its quintessential level is performance. It's drama. You're out there, you're a stand-up comic, you're many things, you're a storyteller, you're a counsellor, I don't know if I use the term educator, which and you come out from that public eye, because there's huge exposure to it. You're out there, you're on the ramparts, you come back from that, and I'd say I probably retreat socially.
Okay.
When I'm not in that scenario, and we talk, I suppose there's Gar Public and Gar Private in Philadelphia. Here I Come, Brian Fields, great play. And we talk about these disparate forces inside us, and I sometimes wonder, I do find an equilibrium.
Okay.
When I'm challenged, when I'm in the arena, when I'm pitted in front of a classroom, perhaps that's me at my most relaxed.
Interesting.
And then I retreat from that, and I retreat socially. Okay. That I don't interact brilliantly outside.
I would disagree, but
yeah, well, I suppose that you come into your own cloistered world, and maybe that's recovery too, and maybe that's because you're performing all the time in the classroom, and it's quite attritional. And I'm probably going off on a tangent here hugely.
This is and tangent bill here.
Yeah, you retreat from that, and you don't know whether it's the real pure you when you're out there in the arena, and then you're somebody else entirely. And maybe you're self-conscious, and maybe you're stilted, and then you meet past pupils, to get back to where we originated this, and sometimes you feel you have to kind of fulfill the mythologized figure, the expectations of who you are. You know, Bob Dylan always talked about it. He said, I put on my Bob Dylan mask. And I'm not going to speak about myself in the third person now. It's like my Milo O'Shea mask. But yeah, that's it. And you come back. So what's the crack? I suppose there's an element of uncomfortableness.
Okay.
And I suppose that's what it is. It's exposure.
Yeah.
In my private world, as opposed to that public persona.
I get you.
There's so many. What would Yeats say? The unity of being is the reconciliation of many disparate forces and the disparate entities we are. And you know, who I am in front of a class
is not who you are here.
It's not who I am here. I suppose this is my intimate surroundings. You know, my family life, and yes, there's huge crossover, and there's huge, like, they dovetail, like, I don't change. But yeah, that's it. I know there's that, I used to have that Irish Writers, this famous poster that's probably in every pub or every old library, the Irish Writers, but I don't know who it was. It says when he was on the stage, he was simple, pure, affecting. It was only when he was off it, he was acting. So that quote always stuck with me.
You know, it's funny you mentioned this. I have a good friend who works in social care, and he talked about the difficulty of him working with a certain client or a service user, and him having to be this kind of person for the betterment of this situation, and then him having to be another kind of person to kind of highlight certain characteristics or personality traits, because this person needs strict, or this person needs to see that I'm a bit more compassionate in this regard. And then he comes home, and then he has his girlfriend and his family life, and he goes, oh, Jesus, well, who am I here? Yeah. It is a very difficult thing, but I do like that idea that you mentioned, that almost we have to endeavour to reach a point where they are all us. And it just depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, and we're trying to reconcile, we're trying to find out, I suppose, essentially who we are. That's our journey. And
I don't know if you ever get, I don't know if there's ever a definitive answer, right?
No, there's no definitive answer. Yeah.
No.
But like, sorry. Yeah.
No, sorry.
No, that unity of being, that's in a classroom with a crowd of young fellas.
Yeah.
If I suppose that's the thread or the clarion tenet of our conversation is going to be teaching and so on.
Yeah.
But definitely, I find that unity of being, you forget everything. You flow, yeah, it's flow.
That's flow state.
Yeah, that's flow state, yeah.
Cool.
Definitely. It's transcendent.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did you first begin considering to become a teacher, and how did that process go? Like, when you were growing up, did you always feel like you could be a teacher, or was it just something that popped up later? And
absolutely not. I had no comprehension or no design or no path that said I was going to be a teacher. I was a confused young fella, came out of school, didn't know what I wanted to do, perhaps still don't. Went to college, followed the expected path, but was I going to be a teacher? No, never. I went to travel, worked on building sites in America, came back, teaching, mother, permanent pensionable job, the guidance of a mother who basically says, yeah, I drifted into teaching, yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know, yeah, I wouldn't have made a conscious decision I want to be a teacher, or I always had that career trajectory.
Okay.
But I think if you're receptive, but you have to go, I went through huge confusion, definitely, right throughout my 20s.
Okay.
Huge, questioned who I was, where I am on this earth. And as I said, perhaps those are the endless questions recurring. There's no quantifiable solution to those questions, I think, but the asking of them is very important. Yeah. And I think if you're receptive, and I always say this to lads, if you're receptive, if you have that receptivity, you know, you sometimes, and you have to sometimes go into difficulty, and into strife and into suffering and into challenge, but if you have the receptivity, you know, it finds you, things find you. I'm a devout believer in that.
Okay.
I know it was the things you believe in this life, they choose you, you don't choose them.
Okay.
That wasn't James Joyce, that wasn't Oscar Wilde, that wasn't Yeats, it was actually Tom Cruise. I can't think of the film.
Jerry Maguire?
No, it was a science fiction. I actually saw it in a picture house, and I do use the term picture house in La Paz in Bolivia.
Okay.
And Minority Report, and it was this absolutely magnificent emporium, this old world cinema. It was a complete anachronism now, and it was La Paz, Bolivia. So even La Paz, Bolivia would have been in the break of the millennium, basically. It would have been way behind contemporary, sophisticated Europe. But even in La Paz, Bolivia, on a Tuesday afternoon, entering this world, this womb, this cavernous depths of an old world movie theatre, which was like going back into 1920s. And it was like an anachronism in La Paz at the time, but it was beautiful. It was, and I saw a Minority Report there, and that quote stuck with me, and here I am using it today.
The things that you love you don't choose them, they choose you.
Yeah, things you believe in this life, they choose you.
Beautiful.
Or maybe that's, I don't know, but like very often, like there's no, and I'd always espouse this to lads, you know, and very often we're fulfilling the expectations of families or societies, and again I use that term, the meta narrative, and there's ideological possession too, in terms of what you're supposed to believe in.
Yeah.
And I see these young men, and they have this, how would I say, this authenticity.
Okay.
There's this freedom. There's also this confusion about their trajectory in life, their journey, and and an awful lot of it is there's a lot of expectations that can stifle them.
Yeah.
And sometimes they balk, and I suppose if you're into mental health, sometimes they balk because socially they feel that this confusion, you know, that they shouldn't have that confusion. That confusion is very important.
It's necessary.
It's necessary, and it's frightening. And I spent my whole 20s, definitely. I reached, I'd say about, I was teaching a good long time, maybe teaching a few years, I was 28. But I remember saying, utterly confused as to my place in the world. Utterly confused as to who I was, what I was about, desperately lonely. And I remember I went away, and I had to go, and again this may sound hackneyed, I had to go away to come home.
I get you. Yeah, I know that.
And I went away and I pitted myself, I left my job, but I was lucky. I could take a career break. This after years, I suppose, searching, years of searching, but I had to kind of leave everything I knew, and I had to leave all the preordained structures, and that was family, that was friends, that was the comfort of the known, and yet you literally had to pitch yourself out there amidst the blood night times. I always referred to them as the blood nights times. They were like, and that was a profoundly challenging period. I actually went away, and I went to South America, I suppose ostensibly travelling, as, which again in our Western opportunistic world, like, we're so lucky.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're so lucky. But I went and I was torn asunder. I was ripped inside and outside, metaphorically, existentially, metaphysically, you name it. But it was a necessary
process.
Oh yeah, a necessary unburdening. It was beautiful, and then you find what you're about.
And so, do you think the time in South America, did you come back kind of rejuvenated, or with a more clarity, or just like stronger conviction, or was just a more self-secure in who you are?
Yeah, I came back probably as confused, but yeah,
Okay.
there was. I think you've pinpointed it there. There was a clarity. Paradoxically, there was a clarity. Perhaps, yeah, more self-assured in my identity. Yeah,
Okay.
of who I was and what I was about. which I might not still to this day. No, we're still searching, as I say, and I'm only feeling this out in my own head now. But definitely, I came and I found love too.
That's a big thing.
Yeah, it was a big thing. Yeah, it was a big thing, and it would have been a parenthesis on my life before that.
Okay.
But I found love on the road, and that was a good thing. I found. I know this sounds really cliche, but there's some harried angel somewhere. I don't know. I'm not a religious man, but is looking out for me, and definitely
You needed that at that time.
I found somebody beautiful and somebody who loves me and keeps the chilly wind off my guitar.
I never heard that. Alright, a few things I want to ask. I want to come back to you coming straight back from South America, okay? And just to kind of expand or unpack a little bit about what you were talking about, how we all maybe need this time to kind of really question what we're doing and like who we are, and I wonder, do you think that this time that we need, like the time of questioning, is it actually, are we given time, or is that process given respect in the kind of expectations of you finish these exams and you do this and then you should get this job and then you should, like, to me it often feels like, or I've come across several people that comment on, say, someone doing some traveling or kind of taking a step back or something that looks like a negative career move to kind of do some deep questioning, and the comments are usually kind of, Jason, I think he or she's maybe a bit off, or a bit they're losing it, or maybe something's up with them. But partially that might be partially true, but also there's a part of them that just needs to do the digging that you're talking about, to kind of go, well, what am I really doing here? Like, what should I really be doing? And I wonder, to go back to the young lads that you teach, and you say that they feel quite stifled and kind of smothered by this kind of expectation. Would you say, like, I guess one thing I want to ask is, do you see this difficulty amongst the people you're teaching consistently over the last few decades, or do you see it, like, is it becoming more concentrated or kind of more visible now?
Yeah, God, it's a difficult question. I think the prerogative of, I suppose, when you're going through school and so on, there's this surge inside that lads will always want to go and explore and go and discover, and sometimes do. I don't think that's something exclusive to 2022 Ireland and the generation of lads coming up. I think that's the rite of passage, isn't it? That they want to go out and explore and discover, and I suppose there is the staid utilitarian pursue a career path, probably, which I'll find maybe to my own young fella coming up that I'll again, it's finding a balance, isn't it? But yeah, I'd always encourage go and explore. If that sounds, again, I'm probably repetitive and cliched here, but like, and what you're about and what makes you tick. And like, I've taught lads who it's an insanity in terms of them being in a classroom and trying to fulfill academics, or you know, they're totally ill-suited. Like there's sometimes in our school system there's a very monochromatic idea of intelligence.
Totally.
And that's hugely stifling. That's hugely restrictive. It's hugely alienating. You know, and there's this, I suppose, the societal perception then, oh, you have to go to college and you have to fulfill a career path. Absolutely annihilating.
Yeah.
Like that causes cataclysms.
Yeah.
Like, yes, there's people who are profoundly academic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I always say, I suppose to put it in the vernacular, if you know, if you find what you love, which isn't easy,
No.
but the receptivity again, it's there for, like, you do know.
Yeah.
Utterly elementally, we do know.
Okay.
And if that's working in stables, looking after horses, if that's, you know, working with wires as a sparks,
Yeah.
you know, like I see young fellas in class there. I've one young fella there at the moment, and it's to have him in the parameters or in the cloister of a classroom. It's actually probably sinful, and you can see the way his mind works.
Yeah.
And I see him, and he's looking at things, and I'd say he's a brilliant problem solver.
Yeah.
But just in that rigidity of a traditional, and I think that's something we need to look at in terms of pathways in education and so on.
Yeah.
Definitely, and I know the NCCA. There's a review of the Leaving Cert,
Oh yeah.
and I know they have talked about pathways
Okay.
and so on. But that's not to deviate from academic standards, which are
No.
very important. And it's not to, again, it's finding out who and what you're about, and but that goes after school. To not feel imposed or an indentured servitude
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
of the expectations of others, to feel an indentured servitude to what other people want of you. And it does take a little bit of putting yourself out there,
Yeah.
and it does take an expression of your autonomy, you know, to go for it.
Which can be difficult as well because your self-esteem is probably already jilted
Yeah,
within this context.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it does. It takes courage. Yeah.
And so you talk about how to find what you love, but so you started teaching maybe not out of like a pure I want to be a teacher, I love this, but when you started teaching, or was it when you came back from South America that you found no, this is, I feel at home here, I feel in, like you said, in flow state. When did that kind of stuff?
No, I always enjoyed teaching. Yeah.
Okay.
Like when I suppose you surprise yourself. I know they say acting is a shy man's revenge, but like, yeah, and I know you may utterly disagree with me here. You're going to stop that, Michael. In many ways, I'm really shy.
Okay.
And again, it's putting on that mask. T.S. Eliot, a face for the faces you meet. But again, I always found when I was teaching, perhaps I was essentially me, and that it was my opportunity to
be you,
to be me, and move away from the self-consciousness, to move away from the inane adult world and the sometimes cloister and restriction and consciousness, as I say, of that. And I suppose that was always there. Now, I've evolved to teaching where definitely I can hit that right frequency, and it's a beautiful thing. You know, Seamus Heaney, Station Island, sorry, I'm quoting here, and I don't mean to be seen to be proselytizing or pedantic or pretentious, but there's a great poem by Heaney, and it's an extract from Station Island, which is a big, long, and he talks about let go, let fly, forget, you've listened long enough. And I can't remember but he says signatures, find the signatures of your own frequency. Let go, let fly, forget, you've listened long enough. It's time now to strike your own note. And I haven't quoted that very well, I'm paraphrasing more than anything, but it's a most magnificent lines, and they always resonated with me. And I suppose that's the clarion tenet of something I'd say to a young fella: find your frequency, whatever that be. as I say, whether that's going and getting 625 points and you're leaving, or it's knowing how to teach somebody to fish and wherever. It's find your frequency, and Heaney's lines encapsulate that, and I haven't done them justice the way I quoted them there, but it's beautiful. And I think it's actually in the context of Joyce meeting a young Heaney, and he imagines the dialogue and the advice, for want of a better word, that would be given. And it said it, you know, you got to put yourself out there, you got to go out into the dark, and it's beautifully metaphorically described. Elver gleams, the darkness of a whole sea. It's all coming to me now. When they make the circle wide, it's time to swim out on your own and fill the element with signatures of your own frequency. And that was me heading off to South America, and I think that's utterly important. And you kind of almost have to be ripped asunder of that to be put back together again. That's a clarion tenet of my teaching. And to know that the world is a magical, beautiful, joyful place, it's also a damn hard place. And that, you know, you've no entitlement, you have to put yourself out there, you have to suffer. But there's joy as well, and great beauty if you're receptive.
And
I drifted away from your question there.
No. I'm glad you brought it up, because again, this is why I think we're doing this now, because I have the memory of being in your class and understanding that you didn't judge me solely for how I did on the test, or how my homework was, and how I got the impression that you cared about the development of the students, not just academically. And I remember there was like one time before the junior cert, because you taught me business for junior cert.
Yeah, I know.
And everyone was asking questions like, "Oh, sir, is this going to be on a test? This, sir, is this going to be on a test? And what about this? And how do we do that again? Or whatever." And I remember, like, towards the end, you said, like, "Lads, the test's on Wednesday, and best of luck with the test. You have put hard work in, but know that how you do out there is not really hugely impacted by this test. How you do out there is how you do out there. You know, it's a different world out there." And I think it's quite, in my experience, it was unique. It's not that I would say that other teachers are deeply committed to helping students get certain results and get out, but to me there are very few that are kind of saying, you know, that's the test important, but the test it's just one small part, tiny thing of your life, and your life is out there, like you have to. And I think particularly in the age of like anxiety over exams and worrying, and people worrying about tests months in advance, studying late at night, they need to hear this. I think they need to have that reassurance to kind of go, it's important, but it's not everything.
Absolutely, and you have a great memory. Yeah, but still, my mantra, that would be my mantra. You know, you develop your voice. You know, you find your voice, and that's one of the great things about my job. Is I can. I don't know how I did it in business.
It's a miracle of business.
It wasn't my favourite subject to teach, put it that way. But I suppose you find a way through anything, don't you? But like, as an English teacher, definitely the capacity to teach people to write, to read, and I mean like to write and read properly, to give them the capacity and language to develop their voice and their expression. Like, that is a great honour, and that is so important. That is so important. If they can develop their voice, and I can teach them what language is, and to give them the gift of language. And I don't give them the gift of language, for them to find the gift of language within themselves. And to articulate the philosophy and espouse the philosophy that language is power. Or if not power, it's meaning, it's identity. And it is, if you get words, and if you find your words and your frequency, it's autonomy, it's authenticity, and it's power for life. It's meaning. You're Luke Skywalker. It's a lightsaber. That language is your lightsaber. And I think that's really important in an age of ideological possession. And I sound like I'm on my soapbox now. That they give them the capacity to question. And I totally haven't answered the question you asked me. No, but in terms of, that's really important. But that voice is a huge part of, in terms of examinations. And I always say, if a lad's at 99% trying to get to 100, he's my hero. And maximise every potential in a classroom for that fella. But also the fella who's trying to get from 23% up to 30, and small increments, and that's maximising potential. That's finding. But I said always, and again, don't want to seem hackneyed, you are not defined by this result, or you're not defined by an exam or the external validation or the external gratification. Nice, you do your best. Like any challenge, like any battle, you do your best. But what does define you is your receptivity, your capacity to develop your voice. And what does define you is your attitude and your responsibility to that attitude. And that's, I suppose, if you were a football coach, you say it's performance, it's not result. You give your heart to every part. Now, obviously we mess up along the way.
Of course.
But I'll still say it again, to put it again in the vernacular. I say it, exams really important, but not the be all and end all. Millions of people have done it before, millions of people will do it after, the leaving cert after you, and you're on a path, you're on a journey, and perhaps there is an overarching emphasis that the leaving cert defines you. It doesn't. As I say, I talk about attitude, whatever, and there are a multiplicity of ways afterwards. And as you pointed out, James, in terms of, it's so important that, and I say young fellas because I teach all young fellas, that their self-esteem isn't eradicated or eviscerated or defenestrated. Again, I'm using tautologies all over the place there. Along the way. And that's a great guiding tenet and principle that you can show lads, listen, this doesn't define you. Again, I've met fellas who probably suffered in a classroom, and then you'd meet them years later and they're immersed in its academics or they found
their frequency.
They found their beat. And Christ almighty, when you're 17 or 18, how are you expected to know what you want to do? When you're 28, you don't know. But receptivity, get out there, and it'll happen.
Have you also met people, former students, that hadn't found their beat? And
God, geez, you're really.
You don't have to answer that.
I can't say. I haven't, no, but okay. I would I'd say it probably every week. I'd say it to lads. I say, and again, maybe I'm hackneyed, but I say Henry David Thoreau, most men lead lives of silent desperation. There's so many people out there, and I'm not proselytizing because perhaps I've reached stage middle age, and something what we talked about earlier on. there's part of me immersed amidst a comfortable learned helplessness. I've reached middle age. I probably don't challenge myself as much as I should. I've become a little bit cloistered. I've become a little bit insular, a little bit desperate, in a really silent, comfortable way. And I don't think there'd be a week goes by, I say most men lead lives of silent desperation, that there's people out there who've given up. And again, it comes back to responsibility to self. That, again, this blame culture, this overbearing sense of entitlement, but this it's always somebody else's fault, or whatever, it's the system's fault, or it's the school's fault, or
my parents' fault.
Yeah, my parents' fault. Philip Larkin. They fuck you up, you do, your mum and dad. Sorry, that famous line, isn't it? Yeah. It's always somebody, and if you could get fellas out of that, you take responsibility for your world, you take responsibility for your life, and that's not defined. And if you can get that, again, that's magnificent. But I think language and the capacity to question their own world is a capacity to question the external then, and that's something that shines for me, that is so important. You know, you're not going to be indoctrinated. You know, like take the zeitgeist, social media. Again, I'm not a Luddite. I'm not somebody who okay, I'm not brilliant technologically, but like and social media is a wonderful tool. But tool is an important word. Like I see psychosocially huge ramifications in terms of, how would I say, ideological possession, that paradoxically you can't question, because you're going against, maybe I'm rambling here, but you're going against movements, a de-individuation, a giving up of your identity.
And just on this, group. That I think what we're hitting at, and again what I think you played such a big role in like my time in school and elsewhere, is we also need to see that, like particularly like the lads that you're teaching, right? You're talking about this kind of pursuit of what's going on with you, what's your frequency, your authenticity, but also we kind of sometimes we can find ourselves in environments where we don't even see it, where plenty of adults aren't doing that. And I think what a lot of students appreciate about you is that very often you come in and we know how you're getting on that day, you know, and there's vulnerability to it, but there's also, because I don't know if you've had this, like it took me a long time to realise that like my dad was just a human, you know, because I just saw him, that's my dad.
At a human level,
yeah. And same with teachers. It took me ages to realise that teachers are human. You know, because you just have them in this box. I guess like he's not worrying about stuff like I am, or she's not. You know, but I think you like cracked open the door of going like, you know, sometimes I'm angry and sometimes I'm elated and sometimes, and I think even just doing that, not even talking about it, but just showing that gives people, young people, going, all right, maybe I don't appreciate it now, but I'm probably going to appreciate it in a while when I see that. It's not very common to see people really push themselves into kind of expressing how they're feeling very often. And I think to link it in with the social media, I think if you spend a lot of time on social media and you follow certain people and you hold certain people in high regard, like you said, there's almost a slippery slope towards you maybe neglecting how are you taking part in the world. That's that person, but how are you taking part in that world?
And your contribution to that world,
and your contribution
and your capacity to to stand up in a world which, again, it's paradoxically, because we supposedly live in a great libertarian age. I think we're like group mentality, you know. I put it as de-individuation. I'm looking for another term, but it is that people give up their identity, and like, again, it comes back to the capacity to question, to not, myopically assimilate. And I think that's really important. It's hard to stand up and be counted. Whatever system. Sometimes basically the meta-narrative that's put out there is, you assimilate, you get in line.
Yeah.
But great part that I hope that I give in a classroom is that voice, that they have the capacity to speak, the capacity to write, and yes, and to question what may be the prevailing consensus and what may be the expected norm. And if you can do that, as I say, that's your lightsaber. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Like, that voice, you've done your job. If a fella can come out with that capacity to question, and I know I'm repetitive here, but it's so important.
Sorry.
I put that much better in a classroom on stage.
Yeah, I believe it. Oh, I've seen it.
But than I do here. I'm actually quite. Yeah.
I this is one thing I want to ask you as well. You've answered it. What is your favorite aspect of being a teacher? And I remember, I think about it often. Carl Jung talks about the fact that every human has a need to feel belong to a certain community or a certain tribe, or certain. But we also have an equally strong need to be us, authentically us. And he says that process of trying to bring those two in alignment, or very close to alignment, that's the work, right? But I think a huge part of that is what you're talking about, the idea that showing people it's important to question, and it's beneficial for it may be temporarily difficult.
Oh yeah.
Like, there may be a lot of suffering.
Yeah, there's suffering, but it's, and I suppose this comes with time. It's still very hard to put yourself out there. But what's the cost of not doing something? There's the cost of speaking. But it's not being a rebel without a cause. It's not. It's, again, the capacity for independent thought, independent opinion, informed independent opinion. That's everything. But I love what you said about Jung there. Yeah, and you've encapsulated, you delineated it beautifully. That's teaching for me. There's a unity that comes that you don't get outside it.
No.
And it's transcendent. It really is. It's flow.
I always, when we were in 6th year, I remember there was a load of lads going, "Jeez, I can't wait to finish," all this. But I remember talking to a few of the lads after, like not too long after, "Jeez, I miss it." Because it's a tight bunch, and like depending on the year, like you can feel so in like such a community,
Yeah, the camaraderie, and the banter, and the crack, and fellas spend their whole days trying to get out of the place, And I always joke with them. I say, lads, you're getting parole. Yeah, you're getting out here. I'm doing a life sentence. After life sentence, I'm the feathered. I'm enshackled. I'm the madman raving at the walls here, chained to this whiteboard. There's no longer blackboard. I'm chained here. You're getting out. You're getting parole. But by the same token, I say, and fellas again, he would say, would have suffered in the place, and you'd meet them and say, so sore, kind of missed it, whatever. Like, that's exactly it. You have it in one, when you felt that and lived that, and I suppose that's it. And I suppose everybody disperses then after school, and you're going out into the world and you're trying to find your path. But there's that. I suppose it's suppose in your adolescence or young adult world, there's the awareness, which is really difficult. It's a difficult time.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful time, but it's a difficult time, and there's awareness of responsibility. But you finish that then. You can't go back to it. This is the school world, because real responsibility comes then, and the rest of your life and whatever, parenthood and everything else that comes down. And for a night came from me, I had a great essay. Sorry, one of the best. I always talk about personal essays at Leaving Cert English, the personal composition, and I say like personal essay should be a treatise, but it should be the opening of the veins to the soul. Reveal the royal sea inside yourself. And like a great personal essay will reveal that royal sea, and it'll ask lots of questions. It will find no answers. But I had a magnificent essay, and I'd love to read it by a young fella a number of years back. Great young fella. And he entitled it The Republic of Pubescence. And he did it from a whole metaphorical or analogy about geographical countries, and adolescence was a country, and young childhood. And again, he used all the tropes of passports and borders and frontiers. It was a beautifully written piece. But again, it was all what you articulated there in terms of leaving, and you can never come back. And it was beautifully done. He talked about the mythologization of what's important when you're young. And I think in his era, drinking the cans, whatever, getting the winky face at the end of the text. I'd have to read what he wrote.
Okay.
But and the mythology that you sometimes aspire to as an adolescent, as a young man, you want to be a man, and you want to become. There's the mythology of what a man is, and he was talking about that, and he captured it beautifully from a young 16, 17-year-old perspective. But he did talk then about the aftermath when you leave, and you can never go back, and talked about the primacy of feeling.
Wow.
But then almost when you're gone, exactly as you talked about, both literally and metaphorically, it's it.
I have to ask, do you still play I got soul but I'm not a soldier?
I'd play anything. I'd play anything. Yeah, I found COVID really difficult. Yeah. Well, you get on with it. But like, I'd always say, like, I'd meet fellas exactly like that and say, Jesus, I don't remember anything about school, but I remember the day you played Morrissey. Please help me get what I want, or whatever. It could be anything that day or that week. Like when I had, like, say, when COVID arrived, we were taken out of the enclave of our classroom. So like, you used to always have your
fort.
Your place, your realm, your forum. And it was great because you could, again, it was much easier to pitch things. It was your place. Fellas would arrive in, they could arrive into a song, whatever. That song might be something to do with, of course it has everything to do with the endless questions recurring, love, life, time. It may have something loosely to do with the class that you're going to teach, or it's a song. And music, poetry, that's again one of the great joys and great pleasures. You know what I mean? How many jobs do you get to have that? And again, so do I still play the music? Yeah, but in COVID, it's been a lot more difficult because I haven't had my own place, so you're more transient. So it's harder to find a cohesive, sort of unified, rapport building world, if that
I get you.
makes sense.
And how does it work, right? Would you wake up and go, oh, the lads need to hear this today? Or would you be in a class and go, I think next week they'd appreciate this? Or just pop into my head, they definitely need to listen to this? Or
Yeah, like I suppose mix and match. Sometimes it just finds its way, and you find that when you're in flow, you see the magic happens. The magic happens, like, and if you were like, I've never recorded in my classes, but there's definitely times when you're in that flow state in a class, and it's a magical thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's, you know, there's the symbiosis there. There's as I say, it's beautiful, but like, you'd sometimes wonder again, where did that come from? Yeah, like you hit a plane that.
Because there's no you in this mode, isn't
Yeah,
there not?
yeah.
It's just,
No,
this feels right.
exactly, yeah. There's no self going, and like the way you, like, it's beautiful. You thread stuff together that might not rightly, that you probably couldn't conceptualize, and if you were following a strict methodology. Yeah, there's the framework there, and as I say, leaving certificate English, you have the great works of literature.
Yeah.
And again, what are they about? They're about our humanity, they're about our flaws, they're about the vicissitudes, they're about those disparate forces inside ourselves, and they're about the journey, and they're about every human who's been messed up since the beginning of time, and they're about every kid who's in front of the classroom. And I say, lads, you know what, you're all messed up. You know, I'm probably the most messed up here. But I says, take consolation that there's 8 billion others exactly like that. And it's the acceptance of that, and there's the taking responsibility for that. And then the great piece of literature. Why are you listening to this? Why are you reading this? Because somehow, it won't offer a solution, but somehow it'll help you navigate your journey, your world, your life, your suffering, your joy. You know, and that's, as I say, I'm only a conduit for this beauty of the human
experience.
Yeah.
You know, one of the lads told me yesterday that you were his introduction to Bruce Springsteen. And Bruce Springsteen is probably his favourite artist.
Oh God, yeah. Some great poetry in the early Springsteen. Yeah.
And sorry, did you see that before? Like, did you have an experience where teachers would play music, or was it just did you do it from day dot? Like the first week you were in school, you just think, oh, it's a good idea to play this song. How did that come about? Because
would have been no. I would never had. I would have gone to a very, I suppose, like most people do, a very rank and file, monochromatic educational experience when I was coming through.
Okay.
And again, no, I couldn't have I would have had any encounters like that.
So it was just flow state one day. Like, do you remember the first time you played the song for the class?
I don't know.
No.
Did I play? I played music in your third year business.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, God.
But you made it work, like you said. And I think sometimes as well, you were saying you didn't enjoy business. I think a lot of people also doing business didn't enjoy every aspect of it. You know, doing the budgets and stuff.
Yeah.
But if you started off with some of the Smiths or something.
Yeah, but that's it. It's we're all doing time. You know, it's beautiful time. It's necessary time, but we're all doing it. And you know, if you can add the colour and the life and the poetry and the music along the way, that's what we're all about, isn't it?
But you do acknowledge that it's quite unique, right? Like I've never heard of another teacher doing it.
See, I wouldn't find that unique at all. I find that quite
mandatory.
Yeah. Well, quite. Yeah. Why wouldn't you play music? I think it's everything.
Yeah.
No, perhaps no, but I know, as you say, in terms of a rigid pedagogical.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like, what are you there to do? To impart concepts, or like to teach? Yes, like it all gets done. You know, but like, and again, this sounds really hackneyed, but you are there to inspire.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, or you're there to make the load lighter for yourself and for those.
Yeah.
You know, and whatever it might be, the words of a song, whatever that makes that, like, as I say, you'd have parents coming into a parent teacher meeting, and I remember about a year or two ago actually, lovely man came into me and he said, this was a really good 6th year class now at this stage.
Okay.
And he says, he's struggling at the moment generally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd ask you, well, what did you know, how was your day or whatever, you know, the classic, and he'd say, well, I don't know, my day was crap, but Mr. O'Shea played Joy Division. That was his one moment, one clarion, one beacon amidst the darkness of his day. And then you say, well, okay, I've done my job. Yeah, the rest will happen. Yeah, you fulfill the criteria. Yeah, very important. You get fellas to maximise the potential. As I say, if a fella's aiming for 625 points, he'll get a 625 points.
Yeah.
If a fella's trying to get from 300 to 350 points, great, he'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
But why not have music along the way? It's fundamentally important. Yeah, absolutely.
And you know what's coming to mind is, even if they don't get the 365 or the 360 you're talking about, the music kept them going throughout that time.
Yeah, and they will get that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If they don't get the 360 at 18 in August of whatever year, if they have the beat and the attitude, and if they can sustain a belief in themselves, they will get the 360 or the 625 in many ways, metaphorically, in the years afterwards. Because, you know, there's so many opportunities, there's so many possibilities, you know. But again, it's navigating it and believing, you know, throughout the sometimes life's damn hard, man. You know, I don't need to sit here to tell you or to tell anybody. Life's damn hard, you know. Bad things happen. Bad things happen at young ages. Bad thing happens at any age, you know. But life's also beautiful. It's sustaining the belief in that.
I last year I worked in a homeless hostel for a few months, and I remember I was getting like quite down about like me predicting the prospects of how some of the women might do in the near future, and I was getting real down about it. So it's like, this won't work for them in a few months, or just I know that they'll run into this blockade or this blockade. And then I remember I was cycling home one day, and this was like came for me where you're going, well, I don't know how it's going to go tomorrow for me. I could get hit by a bus. So why am I worried about their future when all I can do is, like you said, lighten my load and their load simultaneously?
Yeah.
And I need to remember that, because
we all do.
Every
Every day. You know, as you say, you're worrying about not only yourself, you're worrying about trying to, and I'll do it probably 55 times in the next hour. But like, if we could maintain that sort of, the transience, the ephemerality of what we are and who we are. And Philip Larkin's great poem, Obad, you know, and it's about death. And it's about, you know, and how Larkin does it is just, it is, some people say it's really nihilistic, that it's really bleak, but it's so beautifully, redemptively realistic that, it's coming.
Embrace it.
It's where we're all going. So permanent, and Larry actually says you have to read the poem as is, but it's for me it's an inspirational poem.
So what's it called?
Obad or Bald, if I have my pronunciation correct. And like he says, so permanent and blank and true, but how Larkin could really capture the essence of things. And he talks about all the rent, again I probably misquoting, but all the rented intricacy of this world, but it's short-term lease. But it's a magnificent. He actually talks this questioning and this confrontation and this sometimes absolutely smothering. You're like, who are you at 3 or 4 in the morning? And it's literally a guy's meditation, his thoughts about death, another day closer now. And again, I'm not doing the poem justice. But it's a magnificent metaphysical meditation. And I think every man should read it.
Okay, I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah, it's a great poem. Yeah. And it's about death and religion.
Okay, I'll definitely check it out. I've been slacking on my poetry, so appreciate
As I
that.
say, I wouldn't. Again, great thing. I wouldn't pick up a poetry book and read a poetry book.
No.
Very fine. But again, the poetry finds you.
Yeah.
You know, you hear stuff, and as it is,
Yeah.
You showed me that book there. The poetry finds you. Music finds you if you're open to it.
Perception, right? The
Yeah.
receptivity. Just a few more things before we finish. One thing I wanted to ask you was, what's the biggest change you noticed over your teaching career? Like, is there something that you, when you're going into class in 2022, you think, "Jeez, this is a million miles away from 20 years ago," or
Yeah, well, I suppose like I went in an era of an epoch of chalk and talk.
Yeah.
You know, blackboards. You know, things have changed exponentially, and yet they haven't.
Yeah.
Core of good teaching is narrative. The core of good teaching is storytelling, no matter what your subject is. If you can build that rapport, if you know, at its essence, and again I'm tangential from the question you asked, but if you can attain that, the rest of it is incidental. It's the core relationship between you and a group of lads. And yes, there is exponential technological development. As I say, I'm not the most au fait with it. You do adapt.
Yeah.
You do adapt, yes. Technology, there's asynchronous learning now in terms of how things have changed. With again, COVID accelerated it all as well. But yeah, things have changed hugely. But at its core,
they stay the same?
it's relationships, it's narrative, and it's taking responsibility for what's in front of you and who's in front of you. And that I say that from the lad's perspective too. So yeah, it has changed. Am I an anachronism in the flipped classroom now? The so-called, like, yeah, I'd see guys like anything. Sometimes you'd see videos, or you'd go to training and you'd be intimidated by, oh my God, I'm not teaching at all because there's so many, buzz things, or you see people going around and they're doing this or whatever, and you kind of have to take a breath and say, well, this is how I forge my path, or this is how I beat my iron out. Yes, you have to adapt, because that's very important in anything in life. You do adapt, but essentially you're true to what you've learned, and I don't think there's any greater counsel than experience and knowing how to do it. And it's quite simple, because it's that rapport and that relationship, and you can put every newfangled device, you can put every newfangled methodology in, some of them very good, some of them not so good, some of them really well meaning, but they're the vogue lingua franca of some educational system or latest vogue, you know, and it doesn't work. It's not like the intuitive dynamic. Yeah, you bring in stuff, and I'd be sometimes wary of, like, I've seen so many, how would I say, macrocosmic educational initiatives that are the latest buzz of somebody in an office somewhere, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense.
Someone just away from the direct environment.
Yeah, and like it comes in and it'll change then in 5 years' time. It's the same throughout the thing. And as I say, might be beautiful in terms of the pedagogical conceptualization, but like sometimes doesn't work. Yeah. You know, it doesn't work. And like I think teaching's all about personality. Yeah. And yeah, but it has changed. I think the young fellas have changed in terms of digital perception.
Yeah.
And
attention span, maybe, or
perhaps, yeah, perhaps it's a different world. Like, but I still regard the classroom as a vanguard, as a way of inculcating, if that's the right verb, like values. But again, I'd always iterate that they're my values. That it cannot be superimposition of values, because that's not education. And education, again, is the capacity to question, is to develop their value system and their series of questions. And as I said, yeah, I would be wary of the social media and the gratification and the instant, the need for validation. That's had a huge effect on mental health of young fellas. Definitely. So like you can't pretend you're not in a technological age though. And like you have to survive in that jungle, you have to
play with it.
If you what you perceive are the conquistadores coming, you know, maybe sometimes, you know, you gotta adapt. Like that great scene in the end of Apocalypto, Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, Jaguar Paw. Great. And he's fought for his life. He's fought through the jungle against, it's set in the cultural context of the Mayans in Mexico. Okay. And he saved his family anyway. Yeah, and I'm going on. And then at the end, he thinks he's alright, and he's reunited, and he saved his wife and his kid, and he's there in the beautiful, verdant, tropical rainforest, and suddenly he looks out to sea, and who does he see? The conquistadores arriving, and then he just disappears into the undergrowth, into the foliage, and it's a great scene. Cortes and Pizarro, Cortes the killer is arriving. But like, yeah, now I'm teaching, like, it's tough, I don't know, it's attritional. Like, you get older, it gets harder. You know, I always say it, like, so what keeps me young, what keeps me pure, I'm getting older, you know, and I think it's very important, and I have that on tap, is that youth, that vibrancy, that receptivity, that openness, like, that disappears. We enter the inane adult world. Like, give me, as I said at the start, give me a group of 12 to 18 year olds. They are pure. They are absolutely, yeah, there's crap going on in their head and heart and every other part of their body, but they're pure. And like, you can pitch to that audience in such a magnificent way that put me in front of a group of adults. You can give you can give a very polished presentation, or you can give a whatever, yes, and you can provide inspirational elements, but as I say, that pure, the receptivity of my audience the purity, the openness. Now, the same group of lads will also be cannibalistic. They are well capable of sensing any weakness or foible, and they'll rip you asunder, to put it in the vernacular. They will absolutely destroy you. The same, I talk about purity and innocence, but then again, that's the disparate of who we are. So like, and it's not difficult for me, but it's difficult for me energy wise. Like I always say it, you get that audience in front of you. You know, they're yours. You have to rise to the intensity of that, and sometimes a fever pitch intensity. And on the good days, and the great days, you get those great moments where, like, you're imparting concepts, you're imparting knowledge and material, but like you're operating to then to get the real inspiration. And again, how do you do that? Sometimes there's no methodology to how you do it. It happens. You know, you go inside that forge, you beat relearn out, it happens. It happens.
It's something you can't put on a session plan, right?
No, you could, like, the session plan is a framework, but it's attritional though. It's hugely attritional, because I come in, group of 30 young fellas in front of me. You know what I mean? An actor can learn their lines. You know, yes, you have a framework, but you're responding to expectations. You're responding to, and like there's implicit expectations. There's the questions. You're fulfilling an awful lot, and it takes huge energy to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as I say, you're up on stage. You have your audience captivated. You'll probably meet somebody who was in my class last week and said, "No, I wasn't captivated at all. I was bored, witless." Yeah, but yeah. So you're captivated. Yeah, you can see it, and like bell goes. They march out, and again, in cases they're moving on to the next thing. They're gathering up their bag. They're immersed amidst their own subjective frame of reference. As I say, you're just a teacher. They're struggling their way through school or whatever. They're trying to get through their day. But another audience stream in then, and you have one fella hulking down the back. You have one fella whatever. Say, here we go again. Next round, and you're constantly at that. It is a fever pitch intensity, and that gets harder as you get older. I do have quite an attritional style. As you get older, that gets harder. There's bell after bell after bell after bell, round after round after round after round, and you're there in the ring. You know, new audience, new set of expectations, new whatever questions, new demands, new different dynamics all the time.
Takes its toll.
It does, and that's what sometimes I suppose when I start on, sometimes I retreat from that, and socially then I just retreat to my own intimate private world. But it is attritional teaching. It is, and like how long, like in terms of the sustaining, and I know you have to learn how to, but in terms of sustaining, and like that has had a profound, like there's been times where I've been at a low ebb because I felt like I've nothing else to give. It's that great documentary I always quote from it again, is that Muhammad Ali, the When We Were Kings. I don't know if I ever showed clips from that, but there's the, you know, Ali in that ring and fighting and so on, and George Plimpton, the American writer, very grandiose, eloquent, how would I say, erudite style of George Plimpton, and he talks about Ali. He talks about Ali fighting on too long and trying to sustain that, and he quotes Oscar Wilde, and he says, Oscar Wilde, each man kills the thing he loves, and he says, I think Ali, and in the context, in the context of Ali, he says, I think of Ali, and he said, I think, no, it's the thing you love kills you. yeah, it's a great one, and perhaps in some arrogant, some self-absorbed narrative in my own head that I equate that sometimes. That how long, can you sustain it?
It's a fair question.
Going into that ring, So
still a while yet though.
We'll still gather up the gumption and maybe you'll say, if I'm going down, I'm going down with my boots on. But again, maybe that's just some bullcrap romantic narrative in my head. But you do retreat, and like sometimes it's all consuming. And I have found it all consuming over the years, and like there's been times where I've nothing left to give, and you do come back then, and you have profound questions in your own life. What do I have to give my family? What do I have to give my existence? And like I've come out of it a little bit, and I'm much better because I used to always have this, I suppose, and maybe it comes from a lack of self-esteem, or maybe it comes from, I used to always have this unsettled thing and it comes with being something or being somebody, and I'm giving so much to others, and then I'm not giving to my life and to who I can become. And again, this sort of delusional sense that there's always that tomorrow I'm not going to be a teacher in thing. I'm going to be doing something probably much more
established.
We're more quantifiable and with more validation or gratification, or you get being, maybe you have this bull crap notion in your head to be important, or now I don't think like that anymore, but I did for a number of years, and it used to kind of tear me apart. I'm capable of better than this. When you feel like you're in a dead end anonymous world. And you probably realise then as you get a bit older, like it's all bullcrap. It's all bullcrap. This is it. Yeah. And that's a great thing. Was Nietzsche's amor fati. Yeah. Love the struggle, whatever your struggle is. But I used to have this kind of delusional thing that I could be somebody bigger or better. And it's bullcrap.
Didn't you used to show us the clip as well, with De Niro in there's a Raging Bull, where he's like, I could have been somebody. I could have been a contender.
Yeah. Great, Marlon Brando.
Marlon Brando, sorry.
Yeah, he's quoting. No, but he is. Oh, it is.
Okay.
It is De Niro. Yeah, it is that final scene in Raging Bull.
In the mirror.
Yeah, in the mirror. Brilliant scene. Brilliant scene. And I have it. I can't think of it now to think of it, but I know that the speech he gives.
Oh yeah, it's like and you looked at me and you said.
Oh yeah, no, that was and he quotes Marlon Brando when on the waterfront, and again, it's probably the most misquoted and absolutely butchered monologue in movie. Yeah, but I had a title shot outdoors in the ballpark. Instead, I ended up with a one-way ticket to Paluca. It was you, James. It was you. You should have looked out for me. Yeah. You was my brother. Yeah, it's a great thing. And De Niro adds in his own bit then. He's the washed up Jake LaMotta. It's a great scene. And then Cavalleria Rusticana comes on after that scene. And there's a beautiful piece where, and again, I'm not a religious man, but there's a beautiful piece where Martin Scorsese quotes the King James Bible. It comes up and there's this, it's like this stage door or this door closing after De Niro quoting Brando, and he's washed up and he's beaten down and he's a Tom Waits song, and the darkness comes, and then Cavalleria Rusticana, and then the words come across the screen. And so for the The third time the Pharisees summoned the man who had been blind and said, "Speak the truth before God. We know this fellow's a sinner." And the man who had been blind, or the blind man, replied, "Okay, I do not know whether he's a sinner or not. Once I was blind and now I can see." Again, much oft quoted, but it was just the resonance, the power of the way it's done by Scorsese. And then it comes up to whatever, a teacher he had, and whatever, a mentor, and he says, "From Marty." So it was like he dedicated the movie to the teacher. Yeah, and like I couldn't, and I'd feel quite emotional. I don't know whether you had Declan Fitzpatrick.
Never as a never
Yeah,
as a
and
no.
like I'm a teacher, but like Declan Fitzpatrick passed away, young man, and he was a brilliant man. He was a singular entity. He was. Here I am talking about teaching. That man, if you talk about transcendence in a classroom, I'd say it was an out of body experience, and he was a brilliant man, and I couldn't mention that without mentioning him.
Thanks.
Yeah, so and I know many students from
Temple Old
our old school. Yeah, it's like revere him. Yeah, if you're talking about inspiration, he was a consummate professional, a totemic figure. So yeah.
No, thanks for mentioning him.
Yeah.
He played a big role for sure for a lot of people. One thing before we finish, we interviewed this woman, Jill Violet, who runs Playworks in California, and basically she runs this organisation that supervises play and facilitates play for maybe kids like 3 to 10, roughly that age. But she said something very interesting. She talked about how very often the bad students, in quotes, the students that are like hard to kind of keep in order per se or whatever, very often this what they call attention seeking behaviour, what she calls it is connection seeking behaviour.
It's very good, yeah.
And she says once you give that person the connection, the desire to act out is not the same because the need has been met.
Yeah.
And I wondered, do you find the same?
Absolutely, yeah. Once you don't pander.
Okay.
Like
Yeah. I get you.
As I say, we live in an age where well-being, clarion tenet in everything I do, but again, it's very important to question a young fella. I've made mistakes over the years in how I've questioned. By God, I have. But it's very important to question and responsibility. Like, and as you say, I see young fellas say acting out, and it's really well. It's very perceptive and incisive the way you brought it up. Totally agree. But some of them are just crying out for structure and to be given the parameters, the connective parameters of responsibility for themselves, because they're fascinating, because very often those kids, they, like, in many ways they're brilliant, because they're the ones who have the cojones, and this autonomy of spirit, and that won't be quenched. And again, as I say, connection, and that questioning is brilliant. Like, that's a capacity for life. They're not going to be readily assimilated and put in line for the boxcars, but that they can do it, that they have. And again, this is, I suppose, in any educational capacity, that you give them a structure to it. Don't become a rebel without a cause. Don't become another idiot. Don't become destructive, and because very often they're destructive to themselves too. That it's self-destructive behaviour. And I'm speaking from experience here. Yeah.
Me too.
But that's what I mean. We're human. That's who we are. We mess up.
Absolutely.
That if we can learn that, but definitely connection. Yeah. I suppose it's just, what is connection? in terms of what I do find difficult, and I suppose to come back to your question, it's very much an age, and it's brilliant because you'd never go back to that restrictive, cloister, repressive, abusive environment. But we've almost gone to the opposite extreme now, where it's all about the accentuation of rights. But again, I get back to, where's the responsibility? Everybody's aware of their rights. But what about responsibility?
I like this guy. He says, rights without responsibility is adolescence.
Yeah, I've heard that. It's very good. Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, that's it. Rights without responsibility is adolescence. Yeah.
And once you can kind of go, all right, I don't get one without the other, then you're entering up to.
But do we live in an adolescent world then as well, in terms of?
A lot of people would say, yeah.
Like where, you know.
Yeah. There's this author I like, Bill Plotkin, and he does a lot of research around indigenous tribes, and he's kind of come up with this kind of method or structure of quote unquote levels of development, stages of development, within X amount of indigenous tribes, and he says there's roughly around 7 between all these tribes that he studied, and he says that the equivalent to the average person, the average adult in the West, he would say that the indigenous tribes would say they're in stage 2 adolescence.
The indigenous tribes?
Yeah, like as in the indigenous tribes don't see themselves, they have certain levels where at this age you do this, and then you go through this experience, and then you develop these responsibilities, and then you move on to the next level, and then you learn from the elders, and then you move on, and these things. And they would look at like the average person in the West, like you said, like how they would say, oh, they're stage 2 of development, adolescence.
Wow.
It was powerful the way.
Like a societal anthropological comment, yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah, and then that part of that is at odds with what I talked about, that purity and receptivity of that audience, of an adolescent audience, that is just, they listen to you.
Yeah.
Whereas you go into maybe because they have to listen to you, maybe this is the only gig in town, so you go into a group of adults.
Will they, yeah.
Which ostensibly are more receptive.
Yeah. That, sometimes I thought, I wouldn't mind being a teacher, but I think I'd like to be a third level teacher, because at least the students I have really chose what they want to learn.
Yeah.
But sometimes that isn't the case either.
Yeah, and I always said the same. I'd love to teach adults, because you get much more feedback.
Yeah.
Some for good, some for bad.
Yeah.
But you'd feel like, oh yeah, I'm doing something here. I can see more tangible, quantifiable. Yeah, and get your bit of oomph and get your ego assuaged a little bit if you're doing it right. And yeah, but yeah, and yet. And I'm just thinking this out here. The kids are brilliant. It's like they're not tainted. And I'm talking about kids. I'm talking about they come in at 12 or 13 and at 18, and like huge change in that too. But yeah, I'd always say, some of them don't want to be there. Some of them want, it's.
Some of them, I think, don't know that they need to be there. Or
Yeah. And that's what I always say is, so you're not here for exams. Yeah. You're here because you're sharpening your sword. You're learning to speak. You're learning how to write. You're learning. You're being given weapons for going out there. Yeah. Into that. A weapon. But a flaming sword. Pierce talked about on Clive Sullish. Yeah. But anyway, that's maybe sounds very ideological, but I believe that you're going out there, and that's why you're here. Yeah. You're sharpening your sword, and that gives you capacity, that gives you power, and that gives you richness in life. And I don't necessarily say the word happiness, because happiness is this much, it's this much hackneyed, this much abused term, almost as abused as the term leadership.
Yeah.
And you know, and there's corporate platitudes and the brickbats, you know, but happiness, there's fulfillment, there's, as you talked about earlier on, meaning, there's connection, there's suffering, there's, I put it, Nietzsche's amor fati, you know, accept the fate, but strive to change it, love. Anyway, I'm moving off there.
No, I like it.
But yeah, happiness.
It's weaponized almost, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it becomes a product. Yeah, there's closer to happy.
That's what I like.
There's closer to happy,
Yeah.
and that's why, like, I'll always, and it's something I find, that's, as you talked earlier on, James, about meditation and so on, and I'd always regard myself as, and I grew up in an Ireland where torment, difficulty, suffering, and I think still there's almost a fetishization still.
Yeah.
But I definitely grew up in an Ireland where, and perhaps it's intergenerational and perhaps it's a byproduct of trauma, but I grew up where torment, suffering were fetishized, mythologized, you did things the hard way, and it was like drink. And again, I'm drifting in one thing. Like, I grew up in an Ireland which mythologized the drinking culture. Like, I think it's great to see the young fellas now. They much go to the gym than go to the pub, which is that focal point of social interaction has changed, and that's progress we've made.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, part of as a teacher and being on stage all the time and that fever pitch intensity. So, like, yeah, there's things
we always close by asking guests how do they take care of themselves.
Oh, there you go. Just answered it. Yeah, no, I run.
You run?
Yeah, I run. I do a little bit of sea swimming, which again, he's going to talk about sea swimming. That's another one. Another person talking about sea swimming now. No, I'm not going to go there. No, I run up the hill.
Okay.
And I live in the hills. It's magnificent therapy. It's a magnificent life that I have to immersed in the hills. I literally come out of my house and I'm on the frontiers lands and I'm in different worlds that are timeless. The elemental timelessness of them. They were there. These places were there before us. They'll be there long after us, and it's grounding. Again, if that sounds cliched, but that's how I feel. And I run up that hill. I actually run up. Well, I'd have a number of routes running, but one of the great joys is I have a 13-year-old son, and I run with him.
Oh, great.
And it's the most intimate sharing, and I still haven't, because the days are coming now where he'll exert his own independence, he'll be resisting thing, but like we have really, really intimate moments.
Beautiful.
On that hill, and we disappear down the mohawk of a forest road in Wicklow, and we disappear into that forest and we climb up, and that's how I look after myself. I run and I garden. I find great solace in gardening. Yeah, Gerard Manley Hopkins talked about the freshness, deep down things, and I love Hopkins as a poet. And to grow, to propagate, the garden takes you. It's a beautiful, again, a transcendent form. And if you had asked me 10 years ago would I like gardening, I would have looked at you askance. I would have said, so maybe I'm getting old, But yeah, I run. That's how I look after myself. I run and I garden, and they help me. But I'm on the note of the hills. I've a 13-year-old son who's pushing to take me on the hill now, and that's brilliant. It's brilliant. You build up to. So I'm still getting to the top of that hill first. I'm still purging, but it's coming where I'm going to have to.
What's going to happen when the day comes?
Pride and desolation. Yeah, but yeah, so that's how I look after myself. And as I say, I have Carolina, my wife, who I have that love. So that's the
foundation, right?
It's that BAM is that core family. And again, I'm a man, and you have this beautiful thing. I'm a man. I'll mess it up. I won't appreciate it. Do stupid things. And then you have this cocoon, this enveloping, and yeah, I do feel that's ultimately what we care about, and that's ultimately what sustains us. And you know, the rest is everything. The rest is elementary, really, and then you say health. If you have your health, I haven't been again a generation of Irishman who. Health, you almost punish yourself. Almost, you wouldn't be too conscious of your health. So they keep me grounded that way. They say you have to look after yourself. You know, but I used to climb a lot in the mountains. I did a lot of mountaineering. I think that was part of being a young man. I gave up mountaineering. I did high altitude mountaineering. After I had a child, I felt the responsibility. I loved it, but I loved it in terms of the suffering, and I suppose a young man's appetite for danger, and how sometimes we can equate that suffering or danger with feeling that we're special to others, or that again longing for connection. I suppose. There's almost an act of putting yourself out there. It's an acting out, as you talked about, looking for connection, looking for validation from the world. And I'm drifting off into
No, this is good. I like that.
Into some sort of perhaps ambiguous treatise, but yeah, but saying that, there was great. Like I had some great days in the mountains that were just elemental, otherworldly, but you're in danger, and then you have a child and you say, can I pit myself against all these objective dangers? And no, so for me, I made a decision, my responsibility. But that would have been my interest after playing Gaelic football for years and conventional sports. So that's answer. Now back to the sea swimming.
You got to hear about this new thing, sea swimming, right?
I'm actually wearing a dry robe here.
We just came back from sea swimming, actually. Thanks so much, sir. Sincerely appreciate it.
James, an absolute pleasure. And as I say, the years have spiraled away.
I know.
But this has been serendipitous.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really appreciate you taking the time to think of me.
No.
And for whatever little bit of ego to massage it, to say I'm on a podcast.
The ego needs something, you know.
I'm on a podcast. I'm important. I've finally reached that. Yeah,
you got there.
Yeah, but I deeply appreciate you coming up, and it's like I reflect on this with time, and I realise the specialness of it.
Yeah, me too.
And for you to even think of it, and it means a lot, and I'm deeply appreciative.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
So keep the faith, brother.
Keep the faith.
Yeah. But that's it. Whatever faith is.